Okay, in the Anderson reading for today, he basically talks about how high culture cannot be used in today's setting of tourism, and then he used the landscape to make his argument. He For the landscape, he said that the landscape was constructed using using a survey using a survey that Marks and Spencer sent out to people to give them their opinions of what they thought made them British. And so he classified all the responses into different categories. There was one of food, there's one of food, there's one of geographies, there's the one of um there's one of technology and innovation. In the food, he has like from different things in the food category, like there are different things that what people felt made them British or what they signified as being British. And it was in like everyday food, not anything spectacular or made it that, but just like everyday food such as chips and butter, Cornish pasty, Baxter soup. These were things that you can identify as being British, and these things not they come down from being national. They are things that could be used as examples for the national that come down to everyday mundane food that people in Britain eat, and it's not a and to them it's just a normal thing. It is not something spectacular, but they are at a national scene. It can be used as something that signifies that probably an outsider can signify as this is something that is British. This is I can identify this food as a British food. So he was saying basically what Anderson says is that high culture is not something that is applicable today. He does not believe in that argument of high culture. Instead, he says that things that we do every day in the normal our normal everyday tasks that shows, oh, if I'm a Nigerian or if I'm a British, are things that people signify as being nationalistic, and not just as being nationalistic, both nationalistic and normal, both being nationalistic and normal, and not only being nationalistic. And nationalistic things are basically high class things, which are like museums, which can be classified as museums and exhibitions, which only the high class use, and it's not low class is not low class characteristics are not seen in the high culture. But here he mixes both high class and low class to signify what makes nationalism, what makes Britain unique. So he can say, like, for instance, the queen and Big Ben are like national signifiers of what it means to be British. That can be like something that is a high class example, while while a low class can be like probably um the red the red phone booth to like a tea cozy. Those could be seen as low class. I'm not sure if I'm saying the right thing. And but that was what Anderson's point. It was in his last chapter of the book. Then for Franklin's book, Franklin argues that tourism originated due to our interest in discovering new things and knowing about other cultures, which connects us to nationalism. Franklin argues that we do not have to go far to experience culture and tourism or objects or foreign objects. Instead, to satisfy our curiosity. Instead, those culture and objects comes to us in our everyday life. same thing as what Anderson said, that even here, because of, even in this book, because of like the different cultures that are in Britain, somebody in Britain can experience Indian food, a British person can experience Indian food, and they don't need to go to India to have chicken tikka masala to they don't have to travel all the way to India to have chicken tikka masala, because there's London is a metropolitan city, a cosmopolitan city, which is inviting to migrants, and so with this people can experience different cultures and objects. And so he also for he Franklin also talks about high culture here. He defined high culture as if as important signifiers such as values, arts, crafts, and skills of the modern state, as against uh, local folk traditions. High culture was created by the elite class. For example, I gave an example. I said, for example, British suppressing African traditional art forms. High culture involves the combining of different cultures of different time period to create high culture. While low culture started in the 20th century as cities, towns, and villages started to partake also in the decided to function in the tourist industry, and they found it as a means of, as a great source of revenue. However, they do not have nationalistic characters, while in the high culture, nationalistic characters such as museums are seen as way of telling the story, of telling stories of the past. Instead, in low culture, they focus on consumerism, and the histories cannot be compared because all the histories always differ. There's no comparison. All of them always differ. Um, and then he also talked about the mobility, how people, the mobility that were used like at the turn of the century. Okay, so mobility one describes the sedentary life of villages and towns. People did not really live any. People that lived in small cities, small towns and villages did not really have to go outside to explore or inquire about other tourist attraction or sites. They were basically living a sedentary life. They were like basically in a cocoon, if I can say that. They were in a cocoon, and um they did not live, they did not explore any culture or tourist attraction. At this time, capitalist economy had already started happening, and these villagers or towners actually lived their lives in their town. They never went out because everything they wanted was in their town. Work was in their town. Everything they needed to do was in their town. So they didn't see the need to like go outside to discover like any new culture or any tourist site. But however, with the emergence of technology, like the middle class were able to travel like to different places, like maybe example like a seaside tourist site, a seaside tourist attraction to discover history, to discover tourist attractions. But before then, such things were not happening. And they were not really interested in knowing about other culture, especially before technology. Like the example of the cheese, how cheese was and how cheese, because it didn't used to it wasn't something that, it wasn't a food that used to like stay long without 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 it being cool. It used to expire, it used to spoil. So because of this, people didn't see the need for it, and instead the cheese can rather be eaten in the city where it's made, instead of it being transported to another side of the country or the other side of town. While mobility too discusses, as technology increases, transportation becomes more accessible to both, to all classes of people, and also it makes people become more interested in visiting tourist sites. Therefore, people combine, and in this process, people combine both business and relaxation on their vacations, especially in cosmopolitan cities. Sensual tourism is consumed through the five senses, which is vision, taste, smell, and feeling. We consume tourism cognitively, especially when access of anticipation is heightened. Tourism scholars claim that tourism is not only consumed through visualization. Um, I'll now go to nationalism and culture. Tourism, according to the to Franklin, the tourism theory says that that tourism is both omnipresent and impotent, that is passive. The two most influential explanations of tourism identify the representation of tourist objects and what they signify to tourists. So, in this sense, the object is given agency instead of the tourist being the agency. The object instead rather is the agency. um Tourists are intertwined with signifiers of tourism, and it is important as it concerns tourism behaviors or attitudes. Initially, Roget and Urey argued that tourism concerned itself with the search or quest for authenticity in everyday life, the true search for the true search for Arcadian humanity. The objects in this place can confirm or deny authenticity, but most importantly, they are passive. The tourist gaze theory requires that the tourist subject be open to different social discourses that permit the nature of particular types of gaze. This would require the mingling of tourists and tourist subjects, which leaves the notion of social order, domination, and power, which creates an effective movement through forms of popular culture, surveillance, and visual technology. Guiding as an example to paying a tourist sites are examples of tourist entertaining with tourism. Involvement of tourism, either buying souvenirs, taking pictures, or eating at the local delicacy. Those are what I'm trying to say is that examples of tourism are buying souvenirs, taking pictures, and eating the local delicacy. Um, Essentially, visual activity, according to Urey, the objects of the gaze are to be seen, appreciated, recognized, and left behind in search of more tourist objects. That is Urey's own opinion. But Franklin counters that opinion by saying that there is a contact between both the tourist and the object. It is not something that should be left behind, but rather should be taken forward into the future. Um Objects of travel. Not everybody resides in the touristic world, and we do not have to travel to experience different cultures as they travel to us in different forms through food, clothing, internet, and print media. These objects create global cosmopolitanism. Early objects effects include Okay, okay. Laurie the theorist defined object effects include um items that are significant importance to folklore or nationalism, and they have a meaning to the original dwelling. Um For example, triple objects is mass-produced object that do not have any specific origin, but it's just something to be taken home. Their meanings are lost in space. And then travelers objects is like when I go to like a, let's say I go to Rome and I buy a souvenir of the Pieta. That is like a traveler's object, because that's a traveler's object because it's not authentic. It's not something that was made specially for me. I just went to Rome and I bought it. And I bought it. So that for me was what I felt. Um, I felt a traveler's object is. I'm not sure if I'm right. Um, and I now go to define the carnival. And a carnival is an overlay of festivals, and carnivals occur in touristic sites across Europe. The carnivals are conducted in a luminoid way, in a luminoid stage or ritual of the collective social life in the pre-modern period in Europe. Carnival helps to emphasize the interdependencies, duties and obligations of the feudal system. And carnivals carnivals are things that are done at a particular time, and date. A pilgrimage can be defined as the journey from our everyday lives to specific sacred sites which are recognized by major religions of the world. E.g. example like travelling to see the bath to see and bath in the holy water of Our Lady of Lourdes, which is endorsed by the Catholic Church. Franklin argues that tourism mimics pilgrimage, but instead of visiting religious sites, secular sites are visited, and it goes hand in hand with nationalism, as the two cannot be separated depending on the location. Objects of ritual. Objects of rituals. Arrival of heritage tourism. Prior to nationalism, states did not have prehistory, so they made use of pieces of history from folklore and low cultures. Nationalism created a space in which most things had to be national, such as places. Okay, sorry. Nationalism created a space in which most things had to be national, such as places, sites, cities. The piecing of these histories together was created as a national character, as a means of national character and identity. Travel and tourism became an essential part of national life. National life could be performed either the military or public service, or in national sports competitions such as the World Cup or Olympic, visiting places of national importance, or engaging in national holidays such as Independence Day. Schools and museums work hand in hand to educate the young about the nation's past, which promotes nationalism. Romanticism and consumerism. According to Campbell, romanticism created a consumerism in modern societies due to the desire to possess things created in the imagination. Romanticism was interested in the pursuit of pleasure. However, Franklin argued that Romanticism was the reverse, as it was against the production of goods produced by machines and mass production. Instead, it had to do with nature. Ont- Ontological insecurity is defined by Giddens as one way of describing the destabilizing social effects of modernism. For example, people lost a sense of the norms and traditions that had existed, which was provided in the traditional way of life. Heritage sites were created with romantic themes in the 1960s, and it preceded heritage-style consumerism, which could be seen in art and decors that use Victorian period styles.